when readiness becomes an excuse. There is a moment before action where most people pause and call it preparation. The body is still. Breath shallow. Fingers cold around a phone screen. They tell themselves they are waiting to feel ready. The floor is quiet. Morning light cuts across the room. Nothing is stopping them. That's the problem. Readiness feels responsible, mature, intelligent. It sounds better than hesitation. It looks better than fear. But the shoulders stay tight. The chest stays hollow. Another day passes without movement, and no one else notices. You've seen this before. Plans made carefully. Gear laid out neatly. The mind rehearses. The body remains seated. Friends nod when you explain. No one challenges the delay. Ancient warriors understood this silence. Not as patience, but as avoidance dressed in clean language. They moved while the body resisted, while the air felt wrong. If you're honest, you already know what you're waiting for. Comment the habit you've been getting ready for. One line. No explanation. He always started strong, then stopped quietly. Let me tell you about someone like you. He wakes early with an alarm that cuts the dark. The room is cold. Eyes burn. The chest feels tight from shallow sleep. He sits on the edge of the bed, feet on the floor, waiting for the body to agree. It doesn't. He checks the time again, as if it might change its mind. The plan is clear. It always is. Shoes by the door. Notebook on the desk. A clean schedule in his head. He stands, stretches once, feels the dull ache in the lower back, then sits again. Just a minute. The body asks for warmth. The mind asks for certainty. Neither moves. At work later, he talks about what he's building. His voice is steady. People listen. They nod. Someone says it sounds smart. He feels a small relief in the chest. The approval replaces the action. By lunch, the morning has already slipped away without resistance. He doesn't lack intelligence. He doesn't lack information. He knows exactly what to do. That's what makes it dangerous. Knowledge gives him a place to hide. He adjusts the plan instead of touching it. He refines instead of starting. His hands stay clean. At the gym that evening, he watches others move. Iron clinks. Breath hisses through teeth. The air smells like metal and sweat. His shoulders tense just watching. He tells himself tomorrow will be better. Less rushed. More aligned. The thought feels responsible. No one argues with it. At home, he lays out clothes again. The ritual looks disciplined from the outside. The body knows better. Fingers feel stiff as they fold fabric. Jaw tightens. The same promise is made without witnesses. The same promise breaks quietly. Friends joke that he's all plans. They mean it lightly. He laughs with them. The laugh lands shallow. Later, alone, he scrolls and compares. Others seem to move without discussion. The comparison stings, then fades into analysis. He tells himself circumstances differ. The mind stays busy. The body stays still. This is not failure in a dramatic sense. There is no collapse. No crisis. Just a slow accumulation of days where readiness is rehearsed and action postponed. The posture becomes familiar, waiting, evaluating, adjusting. It starts to feel like who he is. The danger isn't that he quits. The danger is that nothing ever officially begins. When nothing begins, nothing can be lost. That safety has a cost he hasn't calculated yet, and the body already feels it. The morning negotiation he never wins. Morning does not attack him. It waits. The alarm sounds. He reaches out, palm flat, silencing it with practiced accuracy. The room holds its breath. Cold air presses against the skin. The body registers weight, stiffness, a dull resistance in the hips. He stays still long enough for thought to arrive. Just today. Just this once. The words feel reasonable. They arrive calmly, without drama. The body listens. Shoulders soften. The spine sinks back into the mattress. The negotiation has begun, and it always sounds the same. No raised voices. No panic. Just logic applied at the wrong moment. He tells himself he's being smart. Strategic. He'll start later, when the body feels looser, when the mind clears. The promise creates warmth in the chest. The bed feels less hostile. The body agrees to nothing but rest. In the kitchen, coffee drips. Steam fogs the air. He stands barefoot on tile, toes numb, mug warming his hands. He scrolls while the liquid darkens. News. Messages. Someone else already training. Someone else already moving. The jaw tightens. He swallows and tells himself comparison is pointless. At work, the day fills itself. Meetings stack. Emails demand posture and tone. He sits upright, shoulders squared, performing competence. Colleagues comment on his focus. He nods. The compliment lands like a sedative. It quiets the earlier tension without resolving it. By evening, the body is heavy. The legs carry the dull ache of sitting too long. The idea of starting now feels inappropriate, almost reckless. He says it out loud to no one. Tomorrow morning. The phrase has become a ritual response, like a bow performed without presence. This is the war most people never see. Not between strength and weakness, but between timing and identity. He believes discipline begins when conditions align. The belief keeps him polite, reasonable, and stationary. There are days he breaks through briefly. He starts strong. Moves hard. Feels alive. The breath burns. Sweat gathers at the lower back. For a moment, the body remembers what it's for. Others notice. They comment. He feels seen. Then the next morning arrives the same way. Quiet. Cold. Negotiable. Each negotiation leaves a residue. A faint distrust in the body. A sense that commands are optional. Over time, the body stops waiting for orders. It waits for permission. That shift is subtle. It feels like maturity. It looks like balance. But balance that depends on feeling ready collapses under pressure. And pressure is coming, whether invited or not. When it does, the habit of negotiating will already be in place, rehearsed daily, calm and undefeated, where choice quietly corrodes the body. There is a cost to deciding every day. He doesn't feel it at first. It arrives softly, like tension settling into joints. Each morning begins with options. Train now or later. Right now or after coffee. Start clean or wait for the right mood. The choices stack without noise. The body absorbs them. He stands in the doorway, shoes in hand. The floor is cold. Calves tight from yesterday's sitting. He rolls his ankles, testing. The body gives neutral feedback. Neither ready nor unwilling. He interprets neutrality as a warning. He steps back inside. The mind likes choice. It feels respectful. Adult. The body does not. The body wants sequence. It wants the same movement at the same hour. When that sequence is broken, it hesitates. Muscles hold back. Breath stays shallow. The command signal weakens. At a cafe later, he watches a man walk past the window at the same time every morning. Same pace. Same jacket. No visible debate. The man's shoulders move with purpose. There is no hurry. No delay. Just continuation. The sight irritates him. He looks back down at his screen. Friends call him flexible. They admire his adaptability. He accepts the compliment with a nod. Inside, something tightens behind the eyes. Flexibility has become another name for constant recalibration. Nothing is fixed. Everything is provisional. When he finally forces himself into motion, It feels louder than it should. The first push-up shakes. The first page written feels stiff. He blames rust. He blames inconsistency. He does not blame the daily erosion caused by choice. Ancient training halls did not ask how a man felt. They did not survey readiness. The mat was cold. Knees met it anyway. Hands wrapped the sword the same way every time. Breath found its count after the body moved, not before. The order mattered. He tries to impose structure now, but it feels artificial. The body has learned to wait. It pauses, asking silently, "Is this final, or will you change your mind again?" The question sits in the hips, the jaw, the lower back. People around him sense the hesitation. Invitations come with caveats. Deadlines are padded. No one says it directly, but the expectation adjusts. He notices. The adjustment stings more than criticism would. This is how discipline leaks away, not through rebellion, but through courtesy toward indecision. Choice feels like freedom until the body no longer trusts commands. When that trust is gone, every action costs more than it should. And once action becomes expensive, readiness becomes the excuse that keeps being chosen. The day the decision was removed. The shift does not arrive as motivation. It arrives as removal. One evening, he stops adjusting the plan. Not out of clarity, but out of fatigue. The shoulders feel dense. The jaw aches from holding itself all day. He writes a single line on a piece of paper and leaves it on the table. A time. An action. No alternatives. The pen scratches. The wrist stiffens. The decision ends there. The next morning, the alarm sounds. The room is the same temperature. The body carries the same weight. Nothing feels improved. But something is missing. There is no internal meeting. No discussion. Feet touch the floor before the thought finishes forming. The movement surprises him. The hallway light is harsh. Eyes squint. The body complains immediately. Tight calves. A dull pull behind the knees. The complaints are noted and ignored, not through force, but through sequence. The order has been set. The body follows because it always follows order. At the training space, the floor is cold. Palms press down. Skin reacts. Breath shortens. He begins anyway. The first minutes feel mechanical. Ungraceful. The mind searches for an exit and finds none. The absence of choice closes the door quietly. Later, at work, something is different. Not visible. He speaks the same way. Sits the same way. But when a meeting runs long, he does not tense. When plans shift, he adjusts without irritation. The earlier action has already been paid for. There is no debt accumulating in the background. Others notice without naming it. A colleague asks if he's been sleeping better. A friend comments that he seems harder to distract. The observations land without pride. He doesn't correct them. He doesn't explain. There is nothing to explain. The routine repeats the next day. And the next. Some mornings are heavy. Some are sharp. The body sometimes resists harder. That resistance no longer matters. It has lost its authority. The sequence remains intact. He stops asking if today will be different. The question no longer applies. The action is no longer an event. It's a placement, like setting a stone where it belongs. The mind follows later, catching up to what the body has already confirmed. Social friction appears. Invitations collide with the fixed hour. He declines without apology. The silence on the other end is brief, then accepting. People adjust. The world reorganizes around what no longer moves. This is where readiness becomes irrelevant. The body does not need to feel prepared to perform what has been decided in advance. It needs consistency more than enthusiasm. It needs repetition more than permission. What he removed was not laziness. It was the daily opportunity to betray himself politely. And without that opportunity, something steadier begins to take shape, waiting to be tested. Continuity matters more than how it looks. The body does not ask for excellence. It asks for return. Some mornings, the movement is weak. The air feels thick in the lungs. The shoulders refuse their usual range. He notices the difference immediately. The old reflex surfaces, this isn't good enough. He stays anyway. Palms press the floor. Knees settle. Breath finds a shallow rhythm. The sequence continues, stripped of ambition. On those days, the session is shorter, slower, almost unimpressive. Sweat barely forms. Muscles feel dull rather than sharp. If someone watched, they might call it half effort. He doesn't correct the impression. The point is not display. The point is that the chain remains unbroken. The body learns this distinction quickly. It stops panicking on bad days. It no longer braces for abandonment when energy dips. Fatigue becomes a condition, not a verdict. The body adjusts downward without collapsing entirely. At work, the same pattern emerges. When a project stalls, he still touches it. One line written. One message sent. Fingers feel stiff on the keyboard. Eyes blur slightly from strain. He stops before damage accumulates. The action is small, but it exists. That existence matters. Others misunderstand this kind of consistency. They assume intensity is the signal. When intensity fades, they disappear. He notices the gap. Friends ask why he still shows up when progress seems slow. The question carries a hint of concern. He hears it as distance forming. In older traditions, continuity was never optional. A monk with fever still sat, briefly. A warrior with injury practiced footwork at half speed. The body remembered the path even when strength faltered. That memory was protected at all costs. He feels the effect now. When a hard day arrives, the body does not freeze. It reduces output without shutting down. There is no internal drama. Just adjustment. The nervous system stays calm. The breath steadies faster than before. The absence of gaps changes how he carries himself. There is less urgency in his movements. Less need to compensate. People around him begin to trust his presence. Not because he promises results, but because he remains. This kind of discipline is quiet. It does not announce itself. It survives boredom, illness, and doubt because it does not argue with them. It simply passes through, leaving the line intact. Most people break not when things go wrong, but when things are imperfect. They wait for a day that justifies effort. He has stopped waiting. Imperfect days no longer threaten the structure. The question shifts from "is this enough?" to something more dangerous: what happens when the body no longer knows how to stop, when obstacles stop asking questions? Problems rarely arrive alone. They arrive layered. The alarm fails. Rain hits the window hard enough to sound intentional. A message arrives early with a demand that wasn't planned for. The body registers the disruption immediately. Jaw tightens. Breath shortens. The old version of him would pause here, inventory the damage, and renegotiate the day. Now, there is no inventory. The shoes go on anyway. Fingers feel stiff tying the laces. The knot is clumsy. He doesn't redo it. Outside, the air is wet and sharp. Cold presses through fabric. The body resists harder than usual. That resistance is no longer a signal. It's just weather inside the skin. This didn't happen by accident. Long before this morning, the responses were decided. When rain falls, the location changes. When time compresses, intensity drops. When interruption hits, the next available slot is used without commentary. The thinking was done when the body was calm, not when it was under load. At work, the same pattern holds. A deadline shifts forward without apology. Others scramble, voices rising. He feels the familiar heat behind the eyes. The urge to explain. To justify. Instead, he adjusts output without complaint. One task moves. Another shrinks. The sequence survives. People notice this kind of response. Not the action itself, but the absence of hesitation. A colleague stops offering advice. Another waits before interrupting. There is a subtle recalibration in how they approach him. Less accommodation. More assumption of follow-through. The body benefits first. When obstacles appear, the nervous system doesn't spike the way it used to. Breath recovers faster. Muscles don't lock as long. The body trusts that confusion won't lead to paralysis anymore. Most people fail here. Not because obstacles are too large, but because obstacles force decisions under pressure. When the decision has already been made, pressure loses its leverage. It can slow movement, but it can't stop it entirely. There are days when the pre-decided response feels insufficient. When the shortened session feels almost insulting. When the adjusted plan looks weak on paper. He executes it anyway. The body remembers what matters, not winning the day, but preserving the structure. Social friction sharpens. Friends question the rigidity. They ask why everything has to be so fixed. He listens. The floor feels solid under his feet. He answers briefly or not at all. The explanations used to leak energy. Now they feel unnecessary. This is when readiness truly collapses as a concept. There is no emotional checkpoint before action. No assessment of mood. No waiting for alignment. Obstacles no longer trigger thought. They trigger execution at a reduced but reliable level. When the world stops asking permission, it starts revealing who has prepared for interruption. The body already knows the answer, and it is becoming less patient with those who don't, the moment others feel your refusal. At some point, the change becomes visible. Not to him first, but to others. It shows up in small refusals. An invitation declined without explanation. A late-night message answered the next morning. The body stays relaxed during the refusal. Shoulders down. Breath steady. No rehearsed apology. The absence of justification unsettles people more than the no itself. He feels it in rooms now. Conversations slow when he enters. Jokes land differently. Someone comments that he's become predictable. The word is meant lightly. It carries weight anyway. Predictable used to mean boring. Now it sounds like a boundary others can't cross. The body has changed its timing. It moves before permission is requested. When the alarm sounds, the feet are already on the floor. Cold air hits the chest. The lungs fill without protest. The mind arrives late and finds the body already committed. There is discomfort in this stage. Not internal, but social. Friends test the structure. They ask if he's being extreme. If he's tired. If he's still flexible. He listens. The floor feels solid. The belt is tied the same way. The routine does not adjust to soothe them. What they are reacting to is not discipline. It is certainty. Certainty removes negotiation, and negotiation is where most relationships hide their expectations. When that space disappears, roles shift. Some people drift. Others step back carefully, unsure where they stand. He notices the quiet that replaces constant explanation. Evenings feel longer. The body recovers faster. There is less noise inside. The absence of internal debate frees energy he didn't know was being spent. This is the point of no return. Not because he is stronger, but because the old identity no longer fits. Waiting to feel ready now feels foreign. The posture of hesitation feels awkward, almost dishonest. The body resists stopping more than it ever resisted starting. There are moments of doubt. They pass through like weather. They no longer get to vote. The sequence holds. People eventually adjust. Or they don't. Both outcomes are clean. The world reorganizes around what does not move, and whatever cannot adapt falls away without drama. This is what most people never reach. Not because it's difficult, but because it requires letting go of readiness as a signal of intelligence or care. Action without emotional permission reads as cold. It is not. It is simply precise. And once precision replaces readiness, there is nothing left to wait for. The only question that remains is whether this structure will be carried forward, or quietly tested by the next excuse that tries to sound reasonable, when waiting ends and being begins. Readiness was never the missing piece. It was the delay you learned to respect. Discipline does not arrive when the body feels aligned. It arrives when alignment is no longer required. When the floor is cold and the knees still meet it. When the air is wrong and the breath adjusts without complaint. When the body moves before the mind finishes checking conditions. This is not willpower. Willpower argues. This is identity. Identity does not ask. At some point, the posture of waiting becomes uncomfortable. Not morally wrong. Physically wrong. The body feels it first. A restlessness when nothing is scheduled. A dull irritation when action is postponed for reasons that sound intelligent but feel hollow. The body has learned a different order now, and it resists returning to negotiation. The unshakable person is not intense. He is settled. He does not scan himself for permission. He does not measure mood before movement. The action happens because it has already happened 1,000 times before. This is why feeling ready is a trap. It teaches the body that action requires approval. Once that lesson is learned, hesitation becomes polite, repeatable, and socially acceptable. Breaking it requires something quieter than motivation and heavier than desire. It requires becoming someone who does not wait. If you felt that internal shift while listening, don't explain it. Explanation weakens it. Mark it instead. Comment one action you will perform at a fixed time, starting tomorrow. No context. No promises. Just the action.